Coming up on Network Africa, at least 120 dead as floods wreak havoc in the DR Congo capital, Kinshasa. U.S.-Africa summit kicks off in Washington, D.C. as President Joe Biden plans to meet continent leaders. And supporters celebrate as South Africa's ANC stops impeachment against President Cyril Ramaphosa. Hello everyone, welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. The authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo say more than 120 people have been killed in the worst floods in years in the capital, Kinshasa. Most of the dead were in hillside areas which suffered landslides in torrential rain. An eyewitness reported seeing the bodies of 9 members of the same family whose home had collapsed. A 3-day mourning period has begun today. There has been a big increase in the number of people moving to Kinshasa in recent years, and the city suffers from inadequate drainage systems and poor urban planning. Well, in the aftermath of that disaster, President Felix Tshisekedi says he will cut short his trip to the United States, where he's attending the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit after floods killed more than 120 people in his country's capital, Kinshasa. In a tweet, he says he will return home on Thursday after his meeting with President Joe Biden. The president has told state agencies to assist the affected families and start rebuilding damaged infrastructure. In a meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the summit, President Tshisekedi blamed the floods on climate change. Meanwhile, delegations from 49 countries and the African Union are attending the 3-day U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, which began on Tuesday. It's the first of its kind since 2014.
Yes, please.
President Joe Biden is expected to announce U.S. support for the African Union's admission to the G20 as a permanent member and tout its support for food security and climate change.
Thank you.
Well, the U.S. mission to Nigeria has welcomed the signing of the Artemis Accords, a multinational set of principles, guidelines, and best practices that provide a common framework for responsible, transparent, safe, and sustainable civil space exploration. Nigeria joins Rwanda in becoming the first African nations to sign the accords. The Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, Issa Pantami, signed on behalf of the Nigerian government during the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. Speaking on behalf of the U.S. government, Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, Monica Medina, said, as we enter this new era in space development, it's important to remember the tangible benefits that space partnership can deliver for our citizens, and that African nations are not just recipients of those benefits, but active participants and partners in the exploration and use of space. Key principles of the Artemis Accords include interoperability of systems, providing emergency assistance to astronauts in distress, registration of space objects to create a safe environment, and the public release of scientific data, among other things. Grounded in the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, the Artemis Accords were launched by 8 nations on October the 13th, 2020. In addition to Nigeria, 22 countries have now signed the accords. Meanwhile, Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo believes African countries must wean themselves off begging the West to earn a global respect and change poor perceptions about the continent. He made the remarks during the opening of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington. Mr. Akufo-Addo urged greater solidarity among Africans to address shared aspirations. According to him, Africans are more resilient outside the continent than inside and must understand that to the outside world, there's nothing like Nigeria, Ghana, or Kenya. We are simply Africans. Our destiny as people depends on each other. The president said that the continent has skills and manpower, but needs concerted political will to make Africa work. Mr. Akufo-Addo remarks came on the day that the International Monetary Fund agreed to give Ghana a $3 billion loan to alleviate an unprecedented economic downturn in the West African country. Dozens of African leaders are in Washington to discuss cooperation with the U.S. amid growing Chinese and Russian influence on the continent. And South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Naledi Pandor, is leading the South African delegation to the second United States-Africa Leaders Summit, which began on Tuesday this week. According to a government statement, Mr. Pandor is representing President Cyril Ramaphosa, who, owing to a very busy schedule, couldn't travel to the summit. The Leaders Summit will discuss three thematic topics, namely partnering on Agenda 2063, multilateral partnerships with Africa to meet global challenges, and promoting food security and food systems resilience. Mr. Pandor will deliver remarks on the first topic, partnering on the Agenda 2063. The last U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit was convened in 2014 under former President Barack Obama. The renewal of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit follows President Biden's intervention during the 34th Summit of the AU in February 2021, wherein he underscored the U.S. commitment and readiness to partner with the continent in taking the relations to new heights. Well, let's take you to the summit proper. As I said earlier, delegations from 49 countries and the African Union are attending the three-day summit of leaders in Washington, which began yesterday. It's the first of its kind since 2014, and President Joe Biden is expected to announce support for the African Union's admission to the G20.
45 African leaders are here attending the U.S.-Africa Summit in the hope that their countries will be better off at the end of this three-day summit. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the United States would announce investment for exchange programs for the African students and to support African entrepreneurs and small businesses.
Over the next few days, we will be announcing additional investments to make it easier for students to participate in exchange programs between our countries, to increase trade opportunities for members of the African diaspora, and to support African entrepreneurs and small businesses. Each of these investments is guided by one overarching goal: to continue building our partnership so that we can better address the shared challenges we face, and ultimately, we can build a safer, more secure, more prosperous future for all of us.
It's not all about economic sway.
Thank you.
It's part of a renewed push to boost ties with the continent where U.S. interests have been challenged by China's security ambitions and trade and investment and lending drives.
Regarding Russia and China, the PRC, we're witnessing the PRC expand its footprint on the continent on a daily basis. And as they do that, they're also expanding their economic influence. A troubling piece there is that they're not always transparent in terms of what they're doing, and that creates problems that will be eventually destabilizing if they're not already. In turning to Russia, we see Russia continuing to peddle cheap weapons. Some of that was mentioned before by one of our senior leaders here. And also, we see Russia employing mercenaries across the continent.
By contrast, Beijing has held its own high-level meetings with Africa every 3 years for more than 2 decades. While senior U.S. competition is a clear backdrop, U.S. officials have been reluctant to frame the gathering as a battle for influence. Washington has toned down its criticism of Beijing's lending practices and infrastructure projects amid calls for some African leaders for more U.S. leadership.
Investing in peace is true, but investing in human capital is the best option. And this is a very serious challenge to Africa, particularly where the fiscal capability or the revenue capability is very limited. Providing service delivery to the people, increasing the quality of education and health, and issues like that is very investing the civil society groups. These are the issues where changing the mindset of the society is the fundamental issue. That is the bottom, that if you push, so many things will change.
Earlier in the week, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the United States will commit $55 billion to Africa over the next 3 years. And during the summit this week, it will discuss 2023 elections and democracy on the continent with a small group of leaders.
Still ahead on the program, the VOA's correspondent Ignatius Anno joins us to tell us more about this all-important summit. Plus, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees partners the African Development Bank to provide electricity for the displaced people in Mozambique. Welcome back to the program. Let's speak with VOA correspondent Ignatius Anno now. He joins us via Skype from Washington, D.C. Ignatius, glad to have you today.
It's okay. Thank you very much. How do you do?
I'm fine, thank you. So what tops the agenda at this summit?
It's been a very busy day, as you can imagine. A while ago, we had the US-Africa Business Forum take place. We've seen a few deals that have been signed between some African countries and, of course, the US government. Just in a few moments from now, we'll also be seeing a deal signed between Niger, Benin, and the US. That's the Millennium Challenge Compact program. But let's talk about what happened yesterday. The Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, met with two key presidents, the DR Congo, which is the Democratic Republic of Congo's Felix Tshisekedi, and His Excellency Hichilema of Zambia, and their respective foreign ministers to sign a memorandum of understanding that will lead to the building of an electric vehicle value chain. You do know that DRC produces 70% of the world's cobalt. Zambia, on the other hand, is the world's sixth largest producer of copper and also Africa's second largest cobalt producing nation. So what the value chain will be doing essentially is to help, both continents add value to these resources to produce the batteries that are used for electric vehicles. Climate change has been a topic and a really main challenge on the issues of global leaders and indeed the world at large. Recently, there were major floods in Nigeria that impacted the lives of people. The global responses to cut global emissions and deal with these climate crises would be the creation or the development of electric vehicles. So such a crucial deal is something that both partners, i.e. the Zambia and the DRC delegation, have really applauded. Anthony Blinken also applauded both nations for the creation of the Electric Vehicle Battery Council, which is supposed to promote the industry. This will not only help the African continent, but indeed the world at large. Okay.
Right. So what are the broader, discussions about these very critical issues of climate change, which, African countries have been clamoring for? I know they've been saying that, the African countries and poorer nations should not be made to pay for what the richer nations are not doing or not doing well.
So that's a conversation that I believe was dealt with at the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh somewhere last year. What this high-level conversations between U.S. partners and the African continent is really doing is pushing ahead of that to see what they can do on their part to tackle that issue. And that's why we're seeing these deals coming. And also just a while ago, we had a company from this country, Cobalt, pumping 150 million US dollars to develop the cobalt industry in Zambia, for example. And His Excellency Hishalema, as well as Samantha Power, who is the administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, spoke highly of what this projects and the impact it's going to have in tackling the issue of climate within the world, and of course in Africa as well, as we've heard about, the devastating floods and food security that is still affecting some countries, especially in East Africa as we speak. Joke.
Right, so speaking about Nigeria, talk to us about the Artemis deal signed between Nigeria and the United States.
Yesterday, the very first US-Africa Space Forum was held, and that's where the partners announced that Nigeria and Rwanda are the very first African nations to have been signatories to the Artemis Accord. It's a bold multilateral vision that is supposed to expand or give us a deeper understanding of the exploration of space into the future. Nigeria has given its backing. Rwanda has also done so. Currently, what we do know is that there are 25 countries, including some countries in the EU and Australia as well, who have also signed on to this particular accord that is supposed to help these partners really get a fairer and deeper understanding of the universe and how it would impact the world.
Right. Thank you for your time today, Ignatius. Thank you for speaking to us on this US-Africa Summit in the United States.
Joker, thank you for having me.
Let's move on to other stories. South Africa's parliament has voted against starting an impeachment process against President Cyril Ramaphosa. This was revealed by the Speaker of Parliament. Lawmakers voted to reject a report by a panel of experts that found preliminary evidence that the president may have committed misconduct over a stash of foreign currency hidden at his private game farm. Mr. Ramaphosa has denied any wrongdoing over the scandal, which has been dubbed Farmgate by the media. He challenged the report in court and has not been charged with any crime, but some opponents have called for his resignation. Before the vote, anti-Ramaphosa demonstrators briefly clashed with police outside of the parliament. Meanwhile, supporters have been celebrating since the results was announced, singing in Soto language, Ramaphosa, we all love you. We are walking side by side with you. The outcome of the vote puts Mr. Ramaphosa in a stronger position to secure re-election as ANC leader at a party contest starting on Friday and to run for a second term as the head of state at a 2024 election. About 214 out of 400 lawmakers in the National Assembly, where the ANC has a majority, voted against setting up an impeachment committee to further probe the allegations against the president and make a recommendation on whether he should be removed from office. However, 5 ANC members were among the 148 lawmakers who voted in favor, disobeying instructions from the ANC's national executive. 2 lawmakers abstained from voting and many others were absent. Farmgate broke in June when South Africa's former spy chief, Arthur Fraser, told police that thieves had raided President Ramaphosa's Palapala game farm in February 2020 and had stolen at least $4 million in foreign cash found hidden in the furniture. Mr. Ramaphosa has said a much smaller amount of money than that reported had been taken and that it was the proceeds of game sales. Contrary to allegations, he also said he reported the theft when he heard about it.
Order, honorable member. Yes, those who have voted yes, 148. And those who have voted no, 214. Abstain, hold on, honorable members. Abstention 2. And therefore, The Section 891 inquiry will therefore not be proceeded with. I thank you, honorable members. That concludes the business of the day, and the House is adjourned.
Well, to other stories, but still to do with South Africa. The government says it will improve bilateral relations with Nigeria by exploring areas of mutual investment opportunities, including agriculture, education, arts and culture, among others. To fast-track this symbiotic relationship, South Africa says it will now issue 5 to 10 years visa for Nigerian investors, as well as postgraduate students starting from next year. The South African Consul General in Nigeria, Bobby Moreau, revealed this new arrangement during a courtesy visit to the Edo State Government House in Benin City, the Edo State capital. Commending the South African envoy for the gesture, Governor Godwin Obaseki explained that the state government is already positioned to attract investments by ensuring that the prerequisite infrastructure is in place.
We want to be intentional about this, to invite Nigerian captains of industry and business people to apply for visas. Then we give them 5 to 10 year visas, multiple entry, I think for a period of 3 months or so that they can, we facilitate the ease of doing business through that, because unless and until we make sure that the movement of business people between the two countries is seamless and simplified, it will be very difficult for us to achieve some of the projects that we are discussing here today. That's one category. The next category, which we consider quite very important, is human capital in the form of the academia. Your university students who are studying in South Africa from Nigeria, your researchers, your academics, professors, the whole group. We are quite very fortunate as South Africa to be having a very huge number of postgraduate students who identify South Africa as their preferred destination for their studies. We have created an enabling environment for them to ensure that they comfortably complete their studies. Now, what we are going to be doing is that if your PhD or your postgraduate studies or your undergraduate studies takes a duration of 5 years, we are now going to give you a visa which is equivalent or even more than the years of your study.
For us as a state, we look at things from an execution standpoint. How do we make it happen? And in that consideration, we want to say, look, how do we reduce the risk? Let's not, pretend about Nigeria was not the easiest place to do business for foreigners. And therefore, governments that seek to attract investments from, outside the country must understand the thinking and also, the thinking where the businesses are coming from and try and approximate to, the issues that they are, related to or concerned with.
And in Mozambique's Nampula province, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has partnered with the African Development Bank, that's the FDB, and the government to provide electricity to refugees and displaced people living at the Maratani refugee settlement under the Energy for All project. The electricity project has several components and contributes to the government's ambition to provide every Mozambican, as well as refugees and displaced people in Nampula province, with electricity by 2030. The province hosts 9,300 refugees and internally displaced persons who fled attacks in neighboring Cabo Delgado province, including 7,200 displaced people in Koran site, a 2-hour drive away from Nampula.
Korani IDP site is a good example of where you see a fusion of humanitarian work and development work coming together. This site has the benefit of being part of the electrification, as you can see, where the houses are connected to electricity.
That's Network Africa. Thank you for watching. I'm Chuck Rogers.